What's going on, guys? Okay, you'll understand that means if you looked at my Instagram and you saw that the transcript for one of my episodes on Spotify uh, said that my intro statement was "What's going on, guys?" Not "What's going on, guys?" What's going on or what's going on? Anyway, getting back to the topic at hand that we're going to be talking about today. Obviously, my most recent episode that went up was about sustainable dieting, and we looked at a little bit of a pyramidal structure of how I like to break down the tenets of what I believe is key to a sustainable diet. That being that first off, it needs to be sustainable and able to be adhered to. Then it needs to look at how we create a calorie deficit. Then we look at protein and fiber targets. And then we look at carbs and fats and supplements and all that thereafter. There's a couple of things I forgot to mention that also fit into that structure, though, that don't come solely from nutrition, but more so behaviors. And the big two are self-monitoring and exercise in that context. Now, I talked a little bit about self-monitoring when I talked about how to establish your current maintenance calories. And I recommend doing that via tracking everything that you eat over a period of 7 days as meticulously as you can. Pardon me. And then taking an average. And then taking that mean average, and that gives you your average calorie per day intake across the 7 days. So, for example, if you do the calculation and it works out as 2,437 or something like that, you know that despite the fluctuations that might occur day to day, so you might only have 2,000 on one day, you might have 3,500 on the weekend. Obviously, that's a massive range, but it helps account for that because we want to know the average of what you're intaking on a weekly basis, day to day. And that's what that number represents. But then that behavior is also a form of what we call self-monitoring. And that's a very, very important behavior, in my opinion, to continue for a long period of time. And the reason for that is if you just track for a week and then stop, you still have really no knowledge of everything that you're taking in on a day-to-day basis. You haven't tracked long enough and seen actual serving sizes long enough to be able to fully estimate just on a visual assessment the serving size or the calories in a meal, for example. You haven't yet developed the knowledge to get the ability to look at a plate of food, a plate of a mixture of different food sources, meat, veg, starches, maybe the dessert, etc., and then accurately tally up how many calories are in that meal or in that entire conglomerate of food. You haven't yet developed that. So you need to be meticulously tracking over a long period of time. And as I said, this is a part of another key tenet of that structure, which is this self-monitoring element. You need to do things that help keep you accountable on a day-to-day basis. This is a very, very important behavior to uptake, is this self-monitoring. So make sure you are tracking daily over a period of months at a minimum. At a minimum, I would say 6 months. At an absolute minimum, you track every single day for as accurately as you can. Obviously, you're going to have days where you might miss one meal, you forget to track it, and you're going to have off and on days, but you make sure that the days where you accurately track are far more than the days where you don't. That's going to be of key importance for actually learning what your long-term dietary picture looks like. The other thing with regards to that then is exercise. Now, exercise is very, very important for many, 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 many reasons. Not just that it can help out with weight loss, but for all the myriad health benefits that you get from it. This is something which I'm talking about at the minute, in something which I'm writing is the benefits of resistance training exercise, for example, and we're looking at, the positive effects it has in older populations in combating sarcopenia, increasing and maintaining good bone density so that when you have a fall, you're less likely to get a break and a fracture, increasingly muscle mass as a method to increase glucose uptake into the muscle. Because if you think about it, skeletal muscle tissue is one of the primary tissues that uptake glucose out of the blood flow, blood vessels. There we go. That's what I was looking for. Out of circulation. That's the word I was looking for. It's one of the primary tissues that does it because skeletal muscles use glucose as their primary fuel source, especially when they're doing a lot of anaerobic high intensity activity, which resistance training often is. Unless you're doing your sets for, 10 minutes at a time with a continuous set where the weight is ridiculously low, you're going to be using a lot of glucose to fuel those muscle contractions. So increasing lean muscle mass is one of the ways that we could potentially combat things like type 2 diabetes and insulin resistance, because we have more muscle, which hopefully means, or could mean, that there's more glucose being taken up out of the bloodstream. And obviously, when you have elevated levels of glucose in the bloodstream for long periods of time, you end up with insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. So, looking at training, for example, I'm often asked the question of what is the best training split? What is the best training split? And as much as I'd love to give just a straight boom, answer, oftentimes it is the exact same way that I talk about it with regards to nutrition, i.e., it has to be the thing that you can keep doing. You have to be able to keep doing it. You have to be able to adhere to whatever training program or whatever form of exercise you choose to do, or forms of exercise. It's not necessarily saying you have to do just one. This is a lot like the carbs and fats thing when we're talking about dieting, where a lot of it is that you can do whatever you prefer. There are going to be certain instances where certain benefits, like I said, in terms of increasing bone density and combating risk of sarcopenia, are going to be greater with something like resistance training as opposed to other methods of activity. However, what typically matters is that you do something and that you keep doing it over long periods of time. But again, going back to that question, what's the ideal workout split? Because there's a lot of information out there that says, oh, you got to do pro split 5 days a week, chest, back, legs, arms, shoulders, stuff like that. Oh no, I've heard push-pull legs is better 3 days a week. Oh no, there's other guys that said I got to do full body 5 times a week. Oh, I got to do double sessions on this day, and maybe I do glutes. I do a glute only session. I come back and do quads later. Right? Okay, let's cut all that out. And first off, you need to go back. First off, have a look at your ability level, where you are in terms of if you're a beginner, an intermediate, or advanced. If you're in your first year of training, you're definitely a beginner, absolutely a beginner. Anything after that, up to about, say, 2 to 3 years, you can start calling yourself, intermediate. And then maybe beyond that, once you're up to like 5, 7 years of training and more, you can start calling yourself an advanced lifter, for example. But when you're a beginner, often what matters is that you just keep turning up to the gym and you keep doing something. These initial adaptations, because you are unadapted to, say, resistance training, for example, and just for the sake of argument, because resistance training is commonly where I'm most commonly asked this question, I'm going to pen it as I'm talking about resistance training, just so I don't have to constantly say that, oh, this is in a resistance training context, this is in a resistance training context with every statement that I make. Every statement I'm about to make, just take it with regards to resistance training, which is weight training. If you've never heard that statement before, you never heard that term before, when we're talking about resistance training, we're talking about weight training. So lifting weights, lifting barbells, dumbbells, kettlebells, etc., etc. I kind of lost my train of thought a minute. I kind of lost my train of thought. But yeah, when you're a beginner, the main thing is that you just keep doing it and keep doing it. Because you are unadapted to resistance training, you're going to make initial training adaptations very, very quickly. And this is why it doesn't really matter so much the exact split that you use. It's pointless looking for something that's perfectly optimal at the minute, because it's not that much of a focus on you got to be eating specifically at this time, you got to be, training at this time. A lot of things is just turning up to the gym and doing something, and then you keep turning up to the gym. You're building a habit. When you're a beginner, you're building a training habit. That's what you're doing. So for example, you decided that, say for example, you want to train 4 days a week. You can commit to 4 days a week. That's really great no matter what experience level you are. For example, obviously when you're looking at professional athletes, professional bodybuilders, for example, they might be doing much higher, training volumes and much higher frequency training routines, 6 days, twice a day, but scaling it back just for a minute. Let's look at what your life is like. If you're not that kind of person, you may have a job to balance. You may have a family to balance. You know, you might be doing nights, and so you don't train when most people do. There's a lot of other things that we got to take into account first. So first off, you got to decide how many days can you commit to training. If you can only commit 2 days, that is fine. You can make absolutely great progress with 2 days. If you can commit 3 days, great. If you can commit 4, 5, 6 days, even better. Remember, they can be too much of a good thing as well. Just remember, they can be too much of a good thing. When you're a beginner, your tolerance to training is also going to be a little bit lower than what it would be if you're an advanced athlete, or potentially a lot lower. So it's very, very easy for you to go to like a bull out the gate and generate much more fatigue than your body can actually recover from. This is a concept known as the stimulus to fatigue ratio. So when we're talking about stimulus, we're talking about training, i.e., when you train, you break down your muscles so it can regrow bigger. So you have a training stimulus. You have a training stimulus, okay? And that is, again, our training session. But that stimulus also generates fatigue in proportion to it. And the fatigue is the thing that you have to recover from. Think about it, right? You go do a training session with your friend for the first time. He's been going to the gym, say, for 2 years. You go and do the training session that he does. He's, okay, maybe a little bit sore 2 days later, and you're in bed. You can't move. It hurts to sit down on the toilet. Okay, you're in a completely state of what we call delayed onset muscle soreness and exercise-induced muscle damage. That's what you're looking at, okay? Because your ability levels are so different. You've generated some stimulus, but that thing then which you're recovering from is your fatigue. And you have to make sure that your stimulus to fatigue ratio is positive in terms of stimulus over fatigue so that you can positively adapt. If you end up in a state where your fatigue constantly outweighs your stimulus or your ability to recover, that's when you end up going down into overreaching and potentially chronic overtraining. And chronic overtraining syndrome, if it goes on too long enough. This is something which very, very commonly affects athletes. You know, when they can't even get out of bed, for example. They train so much and they're so under-recovered that they can't get out of bed. You have to remember, you can you can recover without fully adapting. No, hang on. I'm getting this statement wrong. You can recover fully without adapting. That's what I meant to say. I'm sorry. You can recover fully without adapting. So you can recover fully and maintain the exact same level of ability that you had before. You won't make any gains, but you cannot make any gains without recovering fully. That's where I'm saying you have to recover fully and still have resources left over to adapt. Okay? If you're constantly at the point where your fatigue and stimulus are in proportion to each other, then you're not going to positively adapt. The stimulus has to be sufficient to promote adaptation. So it has to be sufficient to promote muscle growth, for example. But you can't do so much of it so that you generate disproportionately more fatigue than you can recover from. Because if you can only fully recover and your body hasn't got any resources left to promote adaptation from, then you won't positively adapt. Okay, so that's a stimulus to fatigue ratio. And obviously, as you train more and more and more, as you get more and more training experience and you're able to tolerate more workload and more volume, then you can increase the stimulus. But it always, aside from instances where in a periodized fashion, where you've planned it in advance, you have decided, maybe with the help of a trainer or a coach that knows what they're doing, to go into a state of what we call planned overreaching, which is where you are training at a level that you cannot fully recover from for a very short period of time, so that when you do recover, for example, you have something like a deload week, you have what's called a super compensation effect, which is where you have that enhanced recovery and basically your performance dips down, it keeps dipping down, but then you recover, you hit your deload, and basically you do this and you super compensate. Rather than, say, for example, coming down slightly, you recover and you go up and you recover. You hit the next session, you come down and you recover, and your averages go up over time. This is where we're looking to absolutely peak for a certain event or on a certain day. We're coming down. We hit our deload, we allow our body to recover, and as a result, we super compensate and we go up in drastic performance enhancing fashion. That's something that a lot of people are not going to benefit from. They just need to keep turning up to the gym on a regular basis. Regular basis. On a regular basis. What am I doing? Anyway, so when we're looking at beginners, for example, and they come up to me and they ask me, Josh, what's the best split? You have to first off, again, see how it fits in with your overall lifestyle. When are you going to be training throughout the day? How many days do you want to train? And then you're going to start looking at, right, okay, am I going to train every body part once a week, twice a week? Okay, maybe you start off with once a week. That's going to be okay. And you can start off with relatively low training volumes as well, just training relatively hard in terms of the sets that you do. You can benefit massively from a relatively low number of sets. You might only do, say, 3 sets per muscle per session. For example, 3 sets of 12, the classic 3 sets of 12. And then as you get more and more training experience, as you get more and more training experience, you add another set. You add a couple of sets on every week in a periodized fashion as you learn more and more about how to plan your training. Okay, but say we start off I'm going to do 3 sets per muscle per week. Okay, cool. You start off with that and you increase over time. So again, for example, a push-pull leg split might work quite well, or a push-legs-pull split. Think about it. Your upper body's going to be a little bit fatigued from the push day, sorry. So you have legs in between and then do pull closer to the weekend. So for example, it might be Monday is push day or Monday is a pull day, for example. You do legs then midway through the week on a Wednesday, and you do either push or pull, the opposite of what you started the week with, at the end. And then you've got the weekend to recover and go enjoy yourself as well. Okay, cool. That might be a good starting point. And you put your main focus on compound movements. You know, your bench press, your deadlift, squat, or some form of like leg press, big hip hinging and knee flexing movement, okay? And then, you know, you can explore other options as well. You may be at a state where then you've got a bit more advanced in your training. You know, you've been training, you know, say about a year, and you want to try maybe a full body split and see how you get on. Maybe your work arrangements have changed, and now instead of having 4 days where you could have done 2 upper body and 2 lower body sessions before, you've only got 3 days to train now. Okay, maybe we want to keep a good amount of volume for your training status, and so maybe we may do 3 full body days. We may do 3 full body days. That's also a viable option. And for example, we might start the Monday session with a predominantly back-focused upper body session. We might do a predominantly legs-focused upper body session, full body session, sorry, on the Wednesday. And then we might do a predominantly push-focused full body session on the Friday. And that's something called microcycle pulsatility. Basically, with different sessions within your training week, for example, or your training microcycle. So a little bit about what we mean by microcycle and periodization. Periodization, you have something called a macro cycle, big training cycle, macro, big cycle training period. This might be over a year. And this is how we're looking when we're working with athletes, for example. We'd like to periodize and plan their training far in advance, okay? And over a competitive season, for example, this would be how we structure different training sessions at different times. So, for example, we might want different training sessions midway through a football season, for example, to target more of a skill element rather than pure fitness, because we don't want to be generating the extra fatigue from the pure fitness when they're going to be training 5 times a week and competing on the weekend, okay? So we might change up an athlete's training structure depending on where they are in their competitive season. But all the macro cycle is, it's the big overarching structure. It's like over a year, or it could be over several years. Then you have something called a mesocycle. Meso effectively means middle or medium, okay? Medium training cycle is typically when you're looking over a period of a month or a few months, okay? And this is where you start looking at, right, we're going to do, for example, with whatever athlete really, in this preseason block, we've got a preseason block of a few months, we're going to be working predominantly on fitness, on strength, and all stuff like that, their physical characteristics. And as soon as the season starts, they might then, as I said, switch that up for more skill-based blocks. As a result, in the fitness blocks, they'll still be doing the skill sessions, but they'll just be doing less of them. There'll be less time dedicated to it. But once they've built that fitness base and the season's about to start, then they start increasing the focus on the skill element. So they've already built up their block of fitness. However, they haven't built up the skills as much, so they're going to be using the last bit of time that they've got to build up the skills. And just into the season starts, they're going to be building that skill element, okay? So this is how we would structure, this is how you can structure different mesocycles. It's basically a way of dividing training focus depending on what's needed at a current time point. in the athlete's competitive season. Finally, then you have the microcycle, and the microcycle is literally either session by session or week by week, literally the smallest unit of cycles that you can get. Micro meaning small. So this would be how a session plan looks on a session by session basis. So this is where you've got full body session 1, full body session 2, full body session 3. But all of these across your weeks and weeks of microcycles equate to a mesocycle, which fits in with the overall macrocycle. I hope that makes sense. And I forgot where I was going with this. But microcycle pulsatility. So this is where we change the focus, in particular with resistance training, to different muscles at the start of each session, because at the start of each session is where you're going to be most fresh. Okay? Think about it. When you're at the end of a session, you're very fatigued, systemically fatigued, you want to go home, and as a result, the sets at the end of the workout are going to be of less quality than the sets at the start. As a result, you typically see with people who leave certain muscle groups to the end, guilty of it for my calves, okay? People that leave different muscle groups towards the end or never train them, they lag behind, or they don't grow as fully as other muscles which they spend more time at the start and more sets and volume on, simply because they aren't getting the same volume and they aren't getting the same quality of volume. So that's why it sometimes makes sense to put different muscle groups at the start as to help develop an overall more balanced physique. Seems a bit weird when you start telling people to start their sessions off with re-adults, but when their re-adults have been getting nothing but the tail end of the terrible volume at the end of a session, it's a reason why maybe they're not developed as fully. Okay, and there's other examples of that. So you've got this element as well that you can be taking advantage of. But again, all of this technical jargon aside, the number one thing that you need to be able to do is sustain it. If you try to train 5 days, but you know you've only got 3 days to work with, you're going to flunk out. You're going to bail on it. You're not going to be able to sustain it. And you're going to end up getting negative consequences then, because you're going to feel like you're failing because you can't put the effort in, or you can't get there for 5 days when you know you can't. You're going to be beating yourself up all the time. So therefore, just take a step back, be realistic with what you can do, and then decide how many days you can train and make the most of those days, especially if you're a beginner. You're going to get strong by lifting a broom, okay? You're going to get strong by lifting a broom. So just keep turning up and trust the process. Maybe then, as you get more and more experience, you can dedicate more time to the gym. And as a result, you can do more volume, you can do more days, and all stuff like that. Over time, it'll probably become more and more important to you as well. If you really, really value your training and you value the training process, it'll get more and more valuable to you. And as a result, you will want to give more and more time and days to it. Anyway, and again, this is how it scales with intermediate and advanced people as well. Intermediate people, they can tolerate more volume than beginners. So they might be able to do more per muscle group per session. They might be able to do 4, 5, 6 sets twice a week, which is a fairly good target for most people. We want to be looking at, if you want a ballpark average, okay, for optimal muscle growth. And again, it highly depends on the skill level and the ability of the athlete and their training experience. However, you want to be looking between 10 and 20 sets per muscle per week, okay? And also, in a periodized fashion, increasing volume over time from session to session, ideally. And then obviously making sure that you recover and you repeat, okay? These training cycles are going to repeat, but as over time, your averages are going to increase. Your average volume is going to increase. The weights you're using over time are going to increase. All of this is over time, and it's sadly a depressingly slow process, okay? Be prepared to be in this for the long run. So we looked at how many days you've got, looked at how many sets you might be doing. Again, if you're a more advanced lifter, you might be doing something, like 24, 30 sets a week. If you're preparing for a competition, I know Lane Norton is a great example of this when he was saying that he performed his best in his competitions. He's a world champion powerlifter. After doing, and again, this is anecdote, but it's backed up by evidence showing that there's a potential dose-response relationship in increasing volume of hard sets, increasing number of hard sets and muscle hypertrophy, and there is one observed for strength. When he's doing more and more volume, more and more hard sets leading up to a competition, that's when he tended to perform the best. Okay? So again, you might be doing many more sets than the person next to you, but again, it's all based on the individual. So, for example, somebody coming up to me, they said, I've got 3 days or I've got 4 days that I can dedicate to the gym. What would you recommend that I do? Okay. Here's some general guidelines that we can go by. Personally, I would recommend attempting as best as possible, try and train each muscle group more than once a week. Okay, because if you think about it, 2 sessions per muscle per week, you can recover fully between sessions, and you can get double the volume as if you would do one. Okay, if you do 1 chest session a week versus 2, you can get double the volume. Okay, and also think about it. In order to get the same effect as you would across those 2 sessions with the one, you would have to do, say, 12 sets. Say, for example, you're doing 6 sets on one day, 6 sets on the other. You'd have to do 12 sets on the one day. It's going to generate a lot of fatigue. It's going to take a lot of time. It's going to take a lot of time that you could be dedicating to growing other muscles as well. Okay? So that's why ideally I'd like you to train each muscle, say, twice a week, unless you're a pure beginner and you've only got 3 days. For example, you can do, again, a push, a legs, a pull. Okay? It's absolutely fine. Pardon me. Wherever possible, though, and again, with 3 days, you can do upper body, lower body, and full body. Again, wherever possible, I'd like to see about 2 days per week. That's typically what I like to try and do with people. Okay? Then, as far as volume goes, this is going to be something that's highly auto-regulated by yourself. I would recommend starting on the lower side of volume. It could be something as low. Just think about it. You're going to grow from the stimulus of simply doing 1 set above what you done last week. Okay? So again, you might start off with something quite reserved, like 3 sets of 15 reps. And then by the time that 3 sets of 15 becomes 3 sets of 20, okay, you might do 4 sets of 15 or something like that, okay? Or you might drop the reps right down to about 10 to 12 or maybe around 8 to 12, but you're using a much higher weight and you're generating much more mechanical tension, okay? So there's many, many ways that you can do it. But what matters is that each set is being completed with a sufficient level of difficulty, i.e., it's being taken close to muscular failure. And the way you'd estimate that is you go into the gym on a day you are fresh, you do a little bit of a warm up, and then you choose an exercise, for example, a bicep curl and or a seated chest press, and you take the set to where you think, and this is your judgment, this is testing your judgment of intensity. You stop the set where you think you've got 2 to 3 reps left in the tank, okay? That will be called an RPE, or rate of perceived exertion, of 7 to 8 out of 10, or a repetitions in reserve, or RIR, value of 3 to 2, okay? It's going to be very, very important for reasons we'll get to in a minute. This is how we judge set intensity in the context of muscular hypertrophy. Then you rest 2 to 3 minutes minimum, I would say. Maybe 3 minutes should be good to go. Minimum, absolute minimum of 2 minutes. Absolute minimum. And then you complete the set again, but you go to full muscular failure. And I would stop this set the minute your form significantly deviates from what you know is good technique. For example, again, there's plenty of technique videos on the internet that you can use for a bicep curl, for example. Just use the standard technique for this, for the sake of this demonstration, for the sake of this test. The minute, for example, you start, trying to swing the weight, or you have to significantly, lean back in order to get your elbows under the weight so that you can effectively stand up with it. The minute you significantly deviate from the starting technique, that's when you let it go, because your muscle has hit muscular failure, okay? You cannot do it with the same technique that you started with. Your muscles has hit muscular failure. And you record the number of reps for the 2 sets. Now, ideally, as I said, you want to be within 2 to 3 reps shy of full failure, full muscular failure. If you find that you completed, and again, you have to really test yourself with this test. You can't be stopping simply when it feels uncomfortable, because you're going to make the test null and void. Ideally, you would be within this 3 to 2 range of muscular failure. If you do this test and you find that you are outside of this range, say by you did 7 more reps, then you are outside of what I would label as the most effective range for maximizing stimulus in line with fatigue. You don't need to take every set to failure, but every set needs to be completed sufficiently close to it, okay? So therefore, you know that your estimate was slightly off. You know that your estimate of exercise intensity was slightly off. As a result, your sets that you complete in the gym are going to be slightly off, and that's going to negatively impact you. So you know that you can probably do, when you feel that you've got 3 to 2 reps left in the tank, you know that you could probably do 3 to 4 more before you actually say hit failure. So you know that you should be doing another 2 to 3, even despite that it might be burning, it might be hurting, you got to dig through it. It's not easy. So that's how you would program set intensity. And that's what we label as a hard set. A hard set is anywhere from, say, 3 or less reps of failure when we're looking at prescribing exercise intensity. That's where we look at it. That's where it seems to be most effective. Again, you don't have to take every single set to full muscular failure, but you have to get close to it. And that goes across the board. So I think that's pretty much it. So this is how you would start again. I hope this is giving you a little bit of an insight into how to start, or what I think about when I'm looking at carving a resistance training plan, a really heady plan for someone. But if they also say, they might come at you with different focuses, okay? So if somebody comes at me with a focus, I want to get a little bit stronger, but I also want to prepare for this 10K that I'm doing. Well, first off, you get them to prioritize, and you got to prioritize which one is more important. Getting optimally strong or getting optimally cardiovascularly fit, okay? You need to prioritize one, because you only have a certain number of resources, what we call adaptation energy, that you can devote at any given period of time. So therefore, we're going to periodize it, and we're going to see which one is more important, and we're going to dedicate more training time that we have to that thing, and then keep the other one on the back burner, at least until the event is done. So for example, if they've got this, 10K in 3 months and they want to get ready for that, but they also want to get a little bit stronger, but they've decided that 10K is more important than the increase in the 1 rep max deadlift, for example, and they've got 3 days with you a week. Okay, cool. We're going to do 2 days where we're looking at improving your aerobic capacity and your VO2 max. So we're going to be doing 2 cardio sessions when you're with me. And then we're going to do 1 resistance training session. And they got to know that they're not going to get optimally strong, but they're going to improve their aerobic capacity to a much greater extent than if you was to flip it on its head and you do more strength training versus the cardiovascular stuff. Obviously, then you're going to be doing stuff to improve things like their running biomechanics. So you're going to make sure they're being sufficiently strong to maintain good running technique and efficiency over that period of 10K. But everything, pretty much, most of your training resources is geared towards making that 10K as optimally as possible or as good as possible, whilst still keeping some element of strength from your resistance training. And that's where sometimes strength training and cardio can go hand in hand, not in the sense of you're going to be optimal and the best at both, but one can complement the other. As I said, if you don't have a certain level of strength, you're going to suffer in terms of your running biomechanics, for example. And as you get later and later into a race, your technique is going to break down. Therefore, your performance is going to decrease. Your time your time per 1K is going to decrease. Your risk of injury may increase as well. So as a result, we need to have a certain level of strength and muscular endurance to aid in things like, as I said, running biomechanics and running techniques, so that you continue to be safe and run at your optimal pace over the course of the 10K and give yourself the best chance at performing or getting the best time, rather. So again, that's a very, very complicated way, guys, of saying that your training plan or your training program, pardon me, like your diet, is very, very specific to you and has to be based on your life, your occupational constraints, your work life and social balance. And you need to be realistic with how you talk about training. You need to be realistic with how many days you can give. You need to be realistic with how many days you can probably do based on your ability. And you need to be realistic based on what you can do on those days, and also what outcomes you want. Whether you want to be optimally strong or optimally muscular, or running the best 10K that you can, or swimming the best 10K that you can, everything is going to be all around your training goal. As I said, some basic recommendations with regards to training. Again, depending on how many days you have is how you're going to be splitting up your routine. But don't think of it as a one size fits all. You have to be doing a bro split, and you can only do chest on this day, you can only do back on this day, or you have to be doing full body and fasting because of autophagy. Hey, that's completely unrelated. That's completely unrelated. But again, what matters is that you keep doing it. You keep turning up to the gym. You keep advancing your physical capabilities and your health, and you let the rest take care of itself. Basically, you let the rest take care of itself. But yeah, is there anything else that I wanted to say? I don't know if there's anything else that I was gonna say. Obviously, if you've listened to this episode and you want to get any specifics on how you can structure your training system that's going to work best for you, you DM me on at coaching by underscore at coaching underscore by underscore GC. God, I screwed it up. I always get that right in my podcast episodes, and I screwed it up. God damn it. Or but yeah, drop me a DM on at coaching underscore by underscore GC, and I will be more than happy to help you guys. So yeah, hope you enjoyed that episode, guys. Hope you found it useful. Go train hard and go train, well, for the rest of your life, really. For the rest of your life. Training and exercise is the closest thing we have to a fountain of youth. And no matter what, the biggest thing that you can do is keep doing it. Whether it be a group exercise class, whether it be swimming, whether it be going out for a walk every single day. Again, I would advocate for regular resistance training, 2 to 4 times a week. That's what I would advocate for. If you love jujitsu, go do jujitsu. But yeah, whatever you like to do, guys, preference is a big thing as well. And enjoyment is a big thing. You need to be able to do it and keep doing it, like your diet. So I hope you found that useful. Can't wait to speak to you again soon. Out.